Columnist Ezra Klein compiled a list of recent incidents of political violence. In just the last few years, we've seen the plot to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer, the storming of the Capitol and pipe bombs left at the RNC and DNC, the break-in to kidnap Nancy Pelosi and the brutal assault on Paul Pelosi, multiple assassination attempts against President Trump, the assassination of Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband, and the shooting of State Senator John Hoffman and his wife, Luigi Mangioni's assassination of the United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson, and the assassination of Charlie Kirk. Other incidents include the murder of 2 Israeli embassy staff members outside the Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., the arson at Governor Josh Shapiro's house in Pennsylvania as he and his family slept inside, and the firebombing attack on marchers in Colorado who had gathered to support Israeli hostages. Let's bring in Rogers Chair in the American Presidency at Vanderbilt University historian Jon Meacham and MSNBC senior White House correspondent Vaughn Hilliard.
Thank you so much for being with us this morning. Vaughn, first of all, you obviously covered Charlie Kirk and the great impact he had on the conservative movement, on President Trump. President Trump, of course, crediting Charlie Kirk with helping him win the election, not only in 2016, but especially in 2024. Talk about the scale and the scope and the importance of the political organization that he began building the day after he got out of high school, and also the deep emotional connection that he had with so many conservatives and students across the United States.
Richo, I think an important part of this last decade in Republican politics is that Charlie Kirk effectively was able to build an organization that rivaled that of the Republican National Committee, the RNC, the actual Republican Party. They were able to effectively fundraise hundreds of millions of dollars, bring on staff all around the country, build college chapters on university and colleges campuses from coast to coast. And this was somebody who, we should be clear, he didn't succeed every step of the way in his political fights. In 2022, a great many of the Republican candidates in running for statewide office, people like Kari Lake, they didn't ultimately win their races, but he didn't go away. And in 2023, he tried to oust Ronna McDaniel and put in a new RNC chair. He lost that race too. But what transpired after that in 2023 and into 2024 was a turn away from really kind of that long-time door-knocking operation that the party had long funded and put forward for decades, and instead sort of welcomed this social media influence campaign, one in which he personally traveled around the country like he was yesterday, but one in which they were able to tap into not only on college campuses, but in rural communities around the country through his social media presence. And that is what made, I think, in the long run of this 10-year arc of Charlie Kirk in Turning Point USA, the most effective, and one in which he tried to make the Republican Party cool, welcoming. He'd put on events where they'd have sparklers and loud music and lights. And in so many ways, that is where Donald Trump, his very close friend J.D. Vance, Don Jr., they understood that the present hierarchy of today's MAGA Republican Party would have to pass the torch somewhere. And in many ways, Charlie Kirk had such an influential role and had built relationships with people like Pam Bondi, with many other cabinet officials and staffers in their 30s and in their 20s. And that is where this modern day Republican Party understood that Charlie Kirk at the age of 31 was going to continue to be a dominant force in pushing the party in the direction of Donald Trump well beyond just this presidency.
Yeah, I think people maybe of a certain age don't appreciate how influential Charlie Kirk really was for all the reasons you just laid out, and because through social media feeds, people heard what he had to say, whether they liked it or not, almost every day. Can you speak to the reaction there in Washington, Vaughn? We've been talking about how, by and large, it's been responsible. There have been media figures who've been wildly irresponsible talking about this. Some members of Congress also suggesting that there should be reprisals here. But from Speaker Johnson, we just heard a moment ago, to Minority Leader Jeffries echoing the comments of his colleague Johnson, and former presidents all down the line saying, we cannot go on this way in America. What is the temperature right now in Washington? Obviously, it's grief for the moment for so many people, but what does it feel like moving forward?
Grief for so many that are working in this White House, across this administration. I was actually on a plane with Attorney General Pam Bondi and Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. returning from an event in Chicago yesterday when the news of the shooting broke out, and the mood on the plane just went to quiet and subdued. Pam Bondi considered him a close friend herself, and upon getting off the plane, this was before we knew that he had died, she immediately exited the plane. This is difficult for so many in this Republican Party that had run across Charlie Kirk over the last 10 years. But for where this goes from here, I think it's fear. One longtime Republican staffer that I've covered a great many events with, Trump-related events, texted me last night, quote, "Where do we go from here?" And in so many ways, that was a text to a reporter in which I don't have those answers, but one in which the words of Charlie Kirk and others should very well forever be debated. But the ability to debate those words are imperative for our political discourse. And as a journalist who has covered Trump events and the MAGA movement for the last 10 years, we have found ourselves in this country very much engaged in very difficult debates, sometimes ones that divide families, divide neighbors and friends, communities and workplaces. Yet at the same time, what took place in the killing of Charlie Kirk yesterday only wounds our country's ability to engage in those conversations when those words are being removed from the very people engaged in them. As somebody that was around Charlie Kirk a great deal over the last many years, he was somebody who was eager to engage in those debates. The table yesterday was called the Prove Me Wrong table. Effectively welcoming people to the microphone to take him on and debate him. And that is lost here today, guys.